Welcome in, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I actually pulled your card again. We're going back into this to get a little bit more clarity and understanding of really how living in fear, like a prison. Card that I drew, and it's really representative of how that fear, we can kind of lose ourselves in that fear and become stuck, become cold. And the other aspect of this card that I find so appropriate is how living in fear is often because we live from a place of identity versus our heart alignment. Because when we're living from a place of identity, we're really living from a place of outer appearances, such as what will people think of me if I do this thing or I don't do this thing, to look a certain way in order for other people to be accepting of me. It may even be out of a concern for more so for other people than ourselves. So I don't want to do this thing maybe because I don't want to hurt this other person. So those are all examples of how we can kind of get caught up living in that place of fear. And the heart as our inner compass is such a vital part of overcoming fear because our heart will tell us if we're in alignment or if we're not. It's sometimes, very connected to that feeling in our gut, right? Where if we are about to make a choice we inherently know is wrong, we kind of get that icky feeling in our stomach. And if we're acting from that place, like going against what our inner compass is telling us, those are all chances for fear to really sort of enter our being and take over. So, what I'm proposing today is using virtue. That is the virtue card I pulled. And devotion is the other that I pulled today. So, using our virtue as a devotional practice. Sorry, my voice is cutting out a little bit right now. Using that virtue as a devotional practice to overcome the fear, to override it. And virtue is simply your moral excellence, your moral code of living, so to say, like doing right and avoiding wrong, what we consider right and wrong. And that can absolutely vary from person to person. But it's your path of righteousness And when you live aligned with that path of righteousness, the inner compass again, so righteousness, the virtue, your virtue is aligning with your heart as a compass, your inner being as your compass. And when you can live day to day aligning with that inner compass, fear is going to begin to dissolve. Fear is going to begin to release the grip that it has on your life. And I chose crow feathers today because crow, as I've said before, is really about inner truth. And I think honoring that inner truth, because that takes a lot of courage. And that's another part of how the fear can override our our choices in life, our being, our dreams, our ideals. Fear is absolutely what stands in the way of us living our best life. And going back to really living that virtue as a devotional daily practice can really help you step beyond the fear and step into living that ideal that your heart and your soul is dreaming of living. So, keeping in mind that these things can sometimes look crazy to the outside world, right? You may feel that you need to make a change in your life that other people might think that's crazy. You're fearful of what other people are going to think if you make that choice. And I've had this happen many times in my life where I really needed to do this thing, and fear got in the way because oftentimes I was afraid of what other people would think. People are going to think I'm crazy. You know, there's all these ways that we can live from that place of identity. And it's really about dropping that identity and following the compass within your heart. That's the path of righteousness. So it's not a matter of I'm better than you because I'm following this inner path of my virtue, my righteousness. It just means that this is the path for me to follow. And if we all can get to a place where we're living our lives through our virtue, through that devotion to our virtue, fear doesn't really stand a chance. Like I said, it dissolves. So when we kind of look back into this card, I see a face, identity, right? Trapped within this old growth of all of these sort of web of roots and branches. And eventually, over time, slowly, it happens slowly, but eventually, over time, that identity is sort of frozen, immovable, and it's stuck in a place of fear, I believe. And it's so important for us to be free of that entangled mess of living from a place of identity, because we're here to live our lives for ourselves, not for other people. And that is the really important part for us to really see clearly, is that my life isn't to appease others. My life isn't to, it's not my job to make sure others approve of me. It's my job to make sure I'm devoted to my inner virtue within myself. It's really none of my business what anybody else thinks of that. And if that hurts other people, quote unquote, I'm going to say quote unquote hurts other people, because the hurt is something, if we're afraid to make a choice because we're afraid to hurt another person, that is also a very limiting, I'm going to call it a belief, because may it hurt that person? Yes. May our choice that we're going to make in our life, may this hurt another person because that other person doesn't get their way? Yes. But ultimately, I really believe that when we make our own choices from a place of inner alignment, and again, that's the heart, the compass, what resonates as right within your whole entire being. When you make a choice for yourself based on that, if that hurts another person, then that means that other person has work to do within themselves. And you're not responsible for that. So I use the word hurt sort of loosely there. Sometimes life can be really full of what I would call difficult choices. It's not easy to navigate. Sometimes life is very difficult to navigate. Sometimes, again, that can circle back to things we've talked about in other videos, people pleasing and setting those boundaries. Sometimes your devotion to yourself really is about enforcing boundaries, enforcing what is right for you. Because sometimes when we can live in a state of complacency to other people's needs, it can be a comfortable place to be because it can be familiar, but it is not always our aligned choice for ourselves. And we know those times when we are acting out of alignment. Our soul literally becomes heavy from living in complacency. And so I guess I just want to circle back around and talk about making those aligned choices for yourself. They may not always please other people. But if you're truly acting out of alignment for your own being, eventually it I really believe that eventually, if your choices affect another person and that other person temporarily be hurting from your choice, maybe you have to walk away from a relationship that doesn't align with you anymore. Maybe you have to walk away from a job that doesn't align with you anymore. Maybe you have to put up a boundary with a family member who treats you sort of lesser than. There's many different ways that this sort of plays into how fear can control our lives and keep us in a state of stagnant energy. But if you act in alignment, the choice that you make will eventually serve the highest purpose and the highest good of all people involved. And that is one of the ways that fear eventually loses its grip. When you begin to make the choices, put up boundaries, because sometimes those boundaries are a way of honoring yourself and your needs. Sometimes walking away from a relationship, even if that's family members that you may love dearly. Sometimes you have got to put that inner virtue within yourself as your first priority and live your life from that place. And that can be very difficult. And that can be very hard to sort of evolve into that, especially if most of your life is stuck in a place of living from that identity, because that's false. The identity is false. And that's why there's so often fear involved with living through a place of identity. Identity is really, who we put ourselves out to be in the world. Because identity is truly different from person to person with each relationship that we have. Because each identity is a role, really, that we uphold. That is the basis of a relationship. Oftentimes, you may be a wife, you may be a husband, you may be a sister, a brother, um, mother, father. All of these are different roles that we sort of play in life, and we perform differently based on those relationships. And so when you begin to sort of step away from the identities, the roles that we play in life, when you can sort of separate yourself from those identities and really step into the virtue of who you truly are within, and when you act from from a place of that virtue, the identities sort of fall away. And you become closer and closer to what you truly are within your being, your soul, which, as I've talked about before, is that spark of God. And the closer you walk as, in alignment with that true spark of God that you really are, the closer you align to that, your heart's going to guide you into that process. The more you follow your heart, the more you become aligned with that inner spark of God that you are. And so that's primarily the lesson in using our virtue as a devotional practice to overcome the fear. So, that's a lot to take in, I realize. But also can be very simple if we just take it step by step and moment by moment, and really just think of it in that capacity of, you don't have to do all of these big things all at once, but just one step closer to stepping into alignment with your heart and your virtue gets you one step closer to living the ideal life that you are here to live, that you're meant to live. And I will say that you're meant to fulfill, really, because again, you're here with purpose. So if anyone has any questions, please write your questions in the comments. I would love to hear feedback. If you have questions, comments, I welcome all of that. So please like the video, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. Sounds silly to say all that, but truly, truly, I feel like I have to remind people. I feel it's really important to get a basis for who we truly are at our core. And as I've said before, you are so sacred, and you are so special and so magical, miraculous, really. And so remember that as you step into things that bring up fear for you. Remember the divine spark of God that you are, and the infinite power that you can tap into within that alignment with God. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I appreciate you all. Thank you. Let me know again if you have any questions, comments. I'm looking forward to. Thank you.